Well, thank you, Mr. Wallace. I'm Neil Cavuto, and this is your world. And grab it while you can, because if you are looking to refinance the home you're in or buy a new one or get a car loan, well, your ship has come in, presumably for the last time, because it just got cheaper today. However, if you've got a savings account or a CD, you're not going to like this news. Your rate of return, no doubt already paltry, just got paltrier. And therein lies the rub of a Federal Reserve cutting interest rates yet again, the third time it has done so this year, and maybe, just maybe, the last time it does so this year and into next year. Hard to say. This much is not. Markets were sprinting ahead on this development, and the S&P 500 hitting an all-time high in the process. We're going to be speaking with Senator John Thune how this should be the story it says we're talking about, and not impeachment. First to our market pros, including Scott Martin, Danielle DiMartino Booth, and Jonas Max Ferris. Scott, it's always a split read on a cut in interest rates. If you're in debt, you love it. If you're trying to save, you don't. How's this going to spill out for the economy?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the situation that the Fed's in, Neil. You know, the Fed wants to be accommodative. They want to help this economy, but they also want to watch out for things like inflation, which is what low interest rates should propagate. So they're in a tough spot. And then, of course, they've got the political pressure on the side of that. So what's interesting to me, you mentioned it in the jump there, 3 straight rate cuts in a row after a Fed, mind you, that last December made a huge policy mistake and thought they were going to be raising rates most of this year. So it goes to show you this is anybody's guess, but so far so good. I think the Fed has made the right decision the last 3 times they've cut.
You know, now I begin to wonder whether we have a lot of room if the Fed, everything hits the fan and everything goes bad, Danielle, because they don't have a lot more hours in their quiver. This reverses, you know, a third of the 9 hikes we saw since this process of going for near zero interest rates began in late 2015. So then if things really get bad, what do we do?
Well, that's a good question, Neil. I mean, right now the Fed is also conducting effectively quantitative easing. It's growing its balance sheet by $60 billion a month in Treasury bills. So this is indeed a separate form of easing. But to your point, the Fed does not have a lot in terms of further interest rates cuts that it can make. It has indicated that if the data were to change, deteriorate, or not, that it would assess the situation and make changes as need be. But I would remind you that we're coming into an election year, Neil, and you know, never in the history of the Fed have we seen within 7 months of an election the Fed cutting rates because it doesn't want to be viewed as currying political favor.
All right, well, I don't think they have to worry about trying to curry favor with this administration because Donald Trump not a fan of Jerome Powell. I don't know if he's tweeted anything today, but Jonas, I'm wondering if the president will feel that this is enough to secure this economic recovery that has continued almost unabated now for the better part of a decade, and that nothing will endanger it before a year from now when I think there's an election.
Probably not, because the Fed seemed to say they're not going to lower rates anymore unless things get really bad. So this was the 3 times and it's done, basically. And I think the president's going to think you should cut a couple more times. He's going to say that anyway, whether it's true or not. It might be true, by the way. He was actually right about rates needing to go down in the first place when the Fed was back in raising rates mode and we had some issues in the market. The other point, the market, everything's pretty good right now. There's nothing spectacular going on in the GDP numbers that just came out, but inflation's muted. Everything the Fed says is great. The only real fear is what are they going to do when the recession comes, and what's the government going to do? Because we're also running deficits like it's a stimulus program. So there's not going to be another tax cut package and a Fed package. So that's the real downside. We're going to have to go into like a European 0% rate thing mode, and that's where we'll be if we get a recession.
That gets a little scary. Scott, I was reviewing a lot of just the economic news just today. The 1.9% third quarter GDP. I mean, we're running at a good clip, stronger than the consensus estimate there. We're also seeing private payrolls rocket up 125,000 latest month. That's 25,000 better than folks thought. Strong consumer activity, strong earnings thus far, beating estimates handily 3 out of the 4 that we've seen. That's a nice backdrop. What do you make of it?
It's not bad, and I hate to kind of pour out the party punch here, but I'll tell you what, if you look at those numbers, Neil, over the course of while the Fed has been cutting those last 3 times, that data is weakening. You know, we're weak on payrolls. We're weak on wage growth. We're weaker on consumer and business sentiment even. So if you're an alien and you come down to earth, as hopefully they may come for us all at some point here as the Fed keeps kind of cutting to zero, because you're going to look at this and say, well, if the Fed's cutting rates, that's hurting economic data. And so Danielle's interesting point was about quantitative easing, or maybe even quantitative sneezing as it is now, is maybe that's making the economy a little sick and maybe needing more medicine, more medication, which is more rate cuts, which eventually go to zero, and then there's no bullets left.
Yeah, you know, Danielle, what's interesting about this, through it all, the consumer has been remarkably strong and not at all dissuaded by the reticence of corporate CEOs and CFOs, purchasing managers who are being very conservative with their cash when it comes to average shoppers planning for the upcoming holiday season. Katie barred the door. What do you make of that?
Well, look, Neil, we do still, you know, somebody was tweeting earlier today, and I said, look, credit card spending has slowed down appreciably. Wage growth has slowed down appreciably, but it's still growing. So consumers still sense that their paychecks are growing, and I don't think they've clued into what executives right now are pondering, and that is the slowing that they're seeing, the vestiges of the trade war beginning to filter through to the big gigantic services economy that is the U.S. economy. So I'm not so sure that when you get the unemployment rate down at these low levels and executive confidence is tanking, that we don't necessarily have layoffs right around the corner. And we did indeed see weakening in this morning's ADP report.
All right, guys, I want to thank you. I apologize for cutting this a little short here. With us now, the Senate Majority.